Welcome, everybody. Thank you for joining us today. Jed Metzger, CEO and President of the Lima Allen County Chamber of Commerce. I'm going to hand it over to you, please.
Yes, I'd like to welcome everybody to the Northwest Ohio Reshoring Project. I also want to thank you for joining us today to learn more about reshoring and the opportunities that can possibly exist for your businesses or your companies. I am Jed Metzger, President and CEO of the Lima Allen County Chamber of Commerce. And I'd personally like to thank all of our partners, which will be introduced in a little bit, that have come together to make this event possible. Now I'd like to introduce Paul Zito, Vice President of International Department, Regional Growth Partners of Northwest Ohio, to begin the Reshoring Project presentation. Paul?
Thank you very much, Jed. We're a little early, so I'm going to go real slow and allow a minute or two for some more people to join in. Some housekeeping notices. Please mute your microphone or phone during the presentations. And for questions and answers, please hold those until after our main speaker finishes. And please use the chat function, which you should be able to find, I believe, at the bottom of your screen, to send any questions that you might have for me, for our main speaker, Harry Mosier, with the Reshoring Initiative, for Jed Metzger with the Lima Allen Chamber of Commerce, or any of our other partners. Also, just to let you know, this is being recorded, and all attendees will receive a copy of the recording, a copy of the presentations by myself and Harry Mosier, and the contact information for the key individuals in the Northwest Ohio Reshoring Project. My work is for Regional Growth Partnership is to promote foreign direct investment into and exports out of the 17-county region of Northwest Ohio, as one of the 6 regional partners of Jobs Ohio. Those of you who've heard me speak before, you know I get really excited about FDI and exports, and they're very important. About $1 billion in machinery, equipment, bricks and mortar comes into this region from companies all over the world, from Japan, Canada, Europe, and elsewhere. And that equates to about 900 new jobs from FDI into this region every year. In terms of exports, over $7 billion worth of goods are exported from Northwest Ohio every year. And there are 15,000 jobs that are directly tied to exports. So international trade and development are very important to Northwest Ohio. And factored into that is the concept and the development of reshoring. And I and the rest in the group really have to thank Mayor David Berger of Lima, Jed Metzger, and Nicole Scott of the Lima Allen Chamber for having sparked an interest in identifying and coordinating various resources that can help companies reshore. Resources in Northwest Ohio, throughout Ohio, across the country, and around the world. We've had some great brainstorming sessions over the past 10 weeks or so with the Mayor of Lima, with the Lima Allen Chamber, with SIFT, the Center for Innovative Food Technologies, with AEDG, Allen Economic Development Group, Ohio Means Jobs, Rhodes State College, and Jobs Ohio. And we all have great resources that can help a company analyze the concept and the potential of reshoring. Of course. There we go. It's different every system. So the terms reshoring and supply chain all of a sudden have become a common part of the lexicon of the 21st century. 2 years ago, you'd say reshoring or supply chain to someone and they'd look at you really bored or have no interest in discussing the topic. Over the past year and a half, though, certain events have caused reshoring and supply chain to be very important terms. If you think of all the tariffs that have been slapped on goods all over the world, tariffs in the US on goods from China and elsewhere, tariffs on US goods being placed by Canada, China, and other countries on our exports. Then along comes COVID 13 months ago or so, resulting in plant closures, quarantines, and hyper demand. Just think of the shortages of personal protection equipment, wipes, masks, ventilators, things like toilet paper. And in industry, things like semiconductors. The automotive industry is having a terrible time getting their supply of semiconductors for automotive production. I'm reminded of a conversation I had with Japanese company Mitsubishi Chemical last week, which has an operation in Bellevue, Ohio. They did okay during COVID. They were able to get their plastic resins. They were able to get the other components that they need. But the one thing that they had a difficulty getting was glue for the boxes that they used to ship their product. Of all things literally in the world to be short of, their supply chain was disrupted because they couldn't get the glue that they needed. So you've got supply chain disruption caused by COVID, tariffs, and other things. In addition, you've got travel bans because of COVID and visa difficulties. That's resulted in human capital disruption. Engineers and technicians cannot go around the world to install equipment and to work on their products. So if all that wasn't bad enough, a couple of weeks ago, what do we get? A 1,300-foot ship stuck in the Suez Canal. Now, as entertaining and comical as that may be to some people, that resulted in over $10 billion worth of goods being stuck in the Suez Canal. Tremendous disruption to supply chain. Lord knows what's next. Maybe the cicadas that are due to come in the next few weeks. And seriously, that could cause further supply chain disruptions. Now, what can be reshored? There's been a lot of buzz about reshoring over the past year or so due to COVID. And many people think, well, you can reshore any product. Well, according to the Ohio Development Services Agency, they've identified $69 billion worth of goods are imported into Ohio in 2019. A little under half of that could be positioned as having great potential for reshoring. Why? Because there is the supply chain in Ohio or near to Ohio to make things such as machinery and equipment, pharmaceuticals, metals, plastics, medical instruments, chemicals, rubber, aluminum, and aircraft. And then what things should you really not think about reshoring? Well, it's funny, but it seems to be the products that were the original offshore outsourcing decades ago. Things like apparel, furniture, simple tools and implements, and footwear, most of which are made in Asia and low-cost labor countries. Now, why should a company think about reshoring? Many reasons. Number one, diversify your supply chain. If there is a supply chain disruption, you have covered your bases and are able to make up for any decreases in getting access to the components and materials that you need. In addition, just the actual cost of shipping goods from the other side of the world has been increasing tremendously. From what I've heard, what used to cost $3,000 for a container to ship from Asia to Ohio now can cost $5,000 or $6,000 because of a shortage of containers, because of disruptions in the supply chain. In addition, the efficiency and speed of shipping containers around the world has been decreasing. My apologies to any freight forwarder friends that I might have or anyone involved in international shipping, but the traffic is getting tremendous. In addition, people used to offshore manufacturing of components and parts to China and other low-cost labor countries because of the cheap cost of labor. Most analysts agree that over the past 5 years or so, the cost of manufacturing in China is increasing tremendously. Wages have gone up enormously over the past 5 years. In addition, many companies are rethinking their strategies. And instead of wanting to have just-in-time delivery, in other words, not having a lot of stock in a warehouse or nearby, adjusting to just-in-case delivery. You have that reserve of parts and components in a warehouse or nearby that you can get easily. In addition, there are concerns about quality and consistency of manufactured products coming out of China, Vietnam, Malaysia, and other low-cost labor countries. Then there are intellectual property fears and risks. Will your product, will your technology be pirated in another country? Will there be copycats made of your product? And then finally, there's a tremendous desire to have made in the USA on your product, not for patriotic reasons, but for the perception that made in the USA equates to quality. As I mentioned, we all gathered 10 weeks ago or so to brainstorm on how we can coordinate resources for companies to help them analyze the potential of reshoring and to do it effectively. And as I mentioned, in Northwest Ohio, across Ohio, and around the world, there are many resources that can help a company reshore. And those resources could be different depending on the company, the product, the sector, where they're reshoring from. In Northwest Ohio, we have the great Bowling Green State University Supply Chain Management Institute. We have SIFT, the Center for Innovative Food Technology, one of the MEPs or Manufacturing Extension Partnerships in Ohio that can help companies analyze their manufacturing processes and see if it's worthwhile to think about making that one or several products that they're getting from the other side of the world. Also, Rhodes State College, very capable of helping a company to analyze their processes and consider reshoring. The Lima Allen Chamber, who's very responsible for putting this webinar together today. Our local partner in Lima and Allen County for Economic Development, AEDG, Allen Economic Development. And then there are industry-specific resources, such as Polymer Ohio, Bio Ohio, Ohio Manufacturers Association, National Tooling Machinery Association, CAR, the Center for Automotive Research, that have lots of data on reshoring and the viability of it. And then there are supply chain experts at the various universities in Ohio, University of Toledo, OSU, Case Western Reserve University. And then there's Regional Growth Partnership and Jobs Ohio. We can help a company that decides to reshore and realizes they need extra space to install a new line. They need to buy new machinery and equipment. They need to hire more people. And we, RGP and Jobs Ohio, can help with a site search, a building search, working with incentives from the state of Ohio and other sources, helping with workforce issues, and helping with other business services, such as export assistance. There are a wealth of resources out there to help a company reshore. And we encourage everybody today to reach out to the individuals involved in this webinar today to ask for help in reshoring. That leads us to our featured speaker of the day, Mr. Harry Moser, who is the founder of the Reshoring Initiative, which has been around for over 20 years, established in 2010. Harry, no offense, but I call you the granddaddy of reshoring. Harry is very instrumental for having provided a spark for reshoring in the USA and around the world. He is the founder of the Reshoring Initiative. He worked for several decades in the machine tool sector. He participated actively in President Obama's 2012 In-Sourcing Forum at the White House. He's frequently quoted and featured in the Wall Street Journal, Forbes, New York Times, and seen on national TV and radio programs. He has both a bachelor's and a master's degree in engineering from MIT and an MBA from University of Chicago. Harry, you are a great resource for companies that want to learn more about reshoring and take that next step. We, the Regional Growth Partnership, Jobs Ohio, all our friends in Lima and Allen County are very grateful for your sage wisdom and guidance. So I turn the floor over to you, Harry. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Paul. Appreciate it very much. Let's see, I'm going to get it in presentation mode here. How's that? Can you all see that? Is that okay? Yeah, good. So first, again, just to add to what Paul said, I'd like to thank the team, starting with David. The whole team has been very supportive, and I appreciate that very much. Paul did an excellent overview. You can think of what I'm going to do as sort of giving you the details, the between the lines of what Paul talked about, because he really covered many of the main subjects that I think need to be covered. That doesn't mean go away. It means stay around for the details. My section, I broke down into 5 portions. First, define the problem and its causes. And to me, the problem is the trade deficit, the fact that we're so dependent on imports and not self-sufficient. Then look at the positive trends that have been happening in reshoring for the last 10 years. Actually, you'll see it's been very nice. The use of TCO, total cost of ownership, which is, as I'll explain, a methodology to make better sourcing decisions, to more accurately compare the local source to the halfway around the world source. To talk about some regional Northwest Ohio reshoring successes, because you've had at least your share, and then talk in detail about how your company, whether it's an OEM or a supply chain company, can benefit from making more reshoring happen. To give you a little more background on me, this is the Singer sewing machine plant, probably 1910 or something like that, Elizabeth, New Jersey. I grew up in Elizabeth, and the biggest factory in the world at the time was the Singer sewing machine plant. This was 2.5 million square feet, 5,000 workers. It was a Goliath of its day, and by far the biggest thing in the area. My grandfather was a foreman there. My dad ran about a third of the factory. I worked there summers in high school and college, and I drove past 20 years ago. And as far as I can tell, nothing of Singer is made anywhere in the country anymore. And I cried then for what had been lost to the city, the state, the country. And I thought back on my career, and I sold machine tools, and I sold foundry equipment, and industry after industry, company after company, company after company I wanted to go to sell product to, they disappeared. All kinds of just companies, industry, just going away, and almost always due to imports, that somebody from outside was providing something at a lower price and wiped out the domestic companies and industry. And so I decided that that wasn't good and something had to be done. Now, I looked at the data, and the red line here is the trade deficit, U.S. trade deficit, which has gone from, we were about neutral, and see the zero over there, about neutral until about 1980, and then continuously increasing trade deficit to the point where the deficit is now about $900 billion a year. And that sounds like a lot of money, but to put it in perspective, balancing that trade deficit, or taking that line back up to zero, where imports equals exports, would increase U.S. manufacturing by 40, that's 40%. That'd be 5 million manufacturing jobs. So imagine all of your companies with 40% more output than what you have today. If the blue line is manufacturing employment, and you can see it correlates very tightly with the trade deficit. So there's no question but that the major cause of the decline in manufacturing, the decline in manufacturing employment, is the trade deficit. Obviously, we've lost some jobs to productivity, automation, but most of it has been to the trade deficit. And therefore, by reversing that, by reshoring, by bringing the work back will improve US manufacturing employment. So why did it get so bad? And to me, overwhelmingly, it comes down to price. So back about 2 years ago, we did a survey with Plant Moran, one of the largest auditing and consulting companies. And we asked manufacturers and distributors, why do you buy so much? Why do you buy what you buy offshore as opposed to sourcing it here? And overwhelmingly, they said price. And it was either price directly, like you can see the big bar here, or unavailable. And if it was unavailable, why was it unavailable? Because the companies that used to make it here got wiped out by the imports. And so if you add up all the logical connections, I conclude that about 70%, 70% of the decision to import instead of sourcing here is due to pricing. And the pricing difference is substantial. So the horizontal axis here is Chinese price as a percentage of US price. So where the red bar is, they're equal, it's 100%. 1 divided by 1 equals 100. And this is the distribution of the Chinese, the companies who used our TCO estimator to calculate total cost for China versus the US. And you can see the China price, the midpoint of the distribution is around 70%. So roughly half of the cases are below, half the cases are above. And so the US price is 1.4 times as high on average as the Chinese price. And so you can see companies, they look at that and they say, that's incredible. I've got to go there and get my products there because my competitors are going to do it. I'll be wiped out if I don't do it. So the difference is substantial. Fortunately, as Paul was suggesting, things are starting to look better. There's a trend towards reshoring. Some people call it onshoring, or insourcing is what President Obama called it. But it all means bringing back and once again making in the US product that for a while was supplied from offshore. That can be done by US companies, we call it reshoring, or it can be done by foreign companies. If Toyota, Siemens, somebody like that produces product here that it used to import, that's foreign direct investment. But it's really following the same logic. The company has decided that they'll be more profitable producing in the market for the market rather than producing somewhere else and shipping to the market. Some people talk about localization, producing near the consumer means the same thing. Now, a lot of talk about nearshoring. So from the US perspective, nearshoring would be a near country. So Mexico or Canada. Canada gets a little, but their wages and technology are about the same as ours. So Mexico gets a fair amount because their wages are actually lower than the Chinese wages today. And so there's some work that comes out of China or other places in Asia comes to Mexico. I'd rather have it come to the US, rather have it come to Northwest Ohio. But there's some work that's so labor intense and you can't automate it enough to get it into the US. And then I'd rather have it in Mexico than in China because the product coming out of Mexico has about 40% US content, whereas the product coming out of China has 5% US content, China being very self-sufficient. So if I can't have a whole loaf by getting it here, I'd rather have half a loaf by getting it to Mexico. But clearly, my first priority is to get it into the US, and at least today, preferably to Northwest Ohio. Paul mentioned Chinese wages going up, and this chart shows that trend. This is unit labor costs. So the dollar cost of labor to produce a given product, whatever the product happened to be, whatever they were, they're all different dollar values back in the year 2000, but they were indexed to 100, you can see on the left axis, and then each year going forward adjusted for the change in the percentage change in the wage rate, percentage change in productivity, and the change in the currency relative to the dollar. Dollar stayed flat because wages up about 2% a year, productivity up maybe 2% a year. Other countries moved around with currency, but you can see China is dramatically higher up here. So that unit labor cost of the Chinese product is about 5 times as high as it was before. And so it used to be, it was so low you almost didn't measure it, but now it's gotten high enough that even before COVID, even before the trade war, work was flowing out of China. And a fair amount of it went to Vietnam, Cambodia, et cetera. But more or significant portions came to the United States. And I know some experts on China and Southeast Asia, and they would say it makes sense to move the apparel and footwear, the kind of things Paul talked about, probably move those to Vietnam, Cambodia. But if you've got higher tech things, if you've got a lot of metallurgy involved, a lot of electronics, those countries aren't big enough, don't have the supply chain. And in those cases, it makes an awful lot of sense to move the product back to the United States. So here, this gives you a feeling for the overall trend. And we were founded in 2010. And back then, the sum of the two trends, reshoring by US companies, FDI by foreign companies, the sum of those two was about 6,000 jobs announced that year. The trend then peaked in 2017, the sum of the two being 190,000 jobs announced that year, significantly driven by the tax and regulatory reductions, generally business-friendly, enthusiastic view. And then the trade war came along, and companies did not know what the tariffs were going to be, on what products, from what countries, for how long, at what percentage. And they said, business uncertainty, stop. We'll work this out when everything settles down. And so both reshoring and FDI fell off for 2 years. And then in 2020, FDI continued down, but reshoring picked up dramatically and actually reached an all-time high for just reshoring at 109,000, and the total of FDI and reshoring at about 160,000. So getting back close to the all-time total, but reshoring being definitely a record. And looking at those cases of reshoring specifically, about 60% of the cases from March of 2020 to the end of 2020 mentioned COVID as one of the reasons that they reshored. And about half of those, it was directly COVID. It was masks and gowns and gloves and penicillin and ventilators and things like that we had been importing, couldn't get. Companies started to make them, including some companies in Northwest Ohio. The other half were industries that looked at what happened to the medical industry and said, they're getting taken to the cleaners. They're really hurting because they can't get the product they need. The same thing could happen to us. Let's shorten our supply chains. Let's reshore. Let's bring some things back. So looking at that again, for about the last year, we heard day after day, especially the first 6 months, not enough gowns, masks, gloves, worried about penicillin, ventilators, everything else, horrible. But the same potential shortages exist in other industries. We've heard a lot lately about rare earth minerals, 5G, discrete electronic components, not many made here anymore. Apparel, Paul mentioned, 97% of our apparel and footwear is imported. So pretty precarious if it ever became, you couldn't get them. Even the Defense Department, every year or two, puts out a report and describes the products and the materials that they cannot get in the United States and can even not get at our allies, that they're dependent on our adversaries for. So not a good condition for the country. So, but fortunately, because of the problems we've had, companies are starting to recognize this. So a survey done earlier this year by BDO, another consulting company, they asked manufacturing companies, what are your plans? And 24% said they were going to relocate manufacturing to another country. And of the 22%, they would plan to reshore to the United States. So some substantial portions planning to reshore, not necessarily everything, not General Motors bringing back everything they're importing, but maybe some. But at least enough to get to be worth your attention and figuring if it can work for you. So what companies have seen is in the last 10, 15 years, they've had the Fukushima tsunami, wiped out shipments from a lot of Japan. The COVID hurting deliveries from all over the world, starting in China. The Thai floods wiped out a lot of deliveries. The Icelandic volcano for several weeks stopped air freight coming in from Europe. Our own LA dock strike stopped deliveries. And now we've had, as Paul mentioned, the Suez Canal. So companies look at this and they say, if I've got 100 supply chains around the world, buying things from 100 places, all coming together to assemble my product, the odds of one or more of those getting totally disrupted at least once a year is substantial. And in contrast, if I put all of my supply chain in Northwest Ohio, or at least in the United States or North America, I eliminate all of those issues and disruptions that are associated with all the other countries and all the transportation of the goods from those other countries to the US. So companies now often say, I've got two choices. I can have multiple sources. So instead of just supplying in China, maybe you supply in China and India or something like that. Well, that's one possibility, but that's expensive too. Multiple tooling, multiple quality controls, et cetera. Or ideally put all your suppliers right around your assembly plant and keep track of them and only have one, but it's like putting all your eggs in one basket and taking good care of the basket. And that's obviously what we recommend. And if you think of this from a societal viewpoint, not just dollars and cents for companies, think of the disruptions, the societal disruptions we've had the last year, the inner city populations. I saw a TV interview of a gang leader in prison, young fella, and they asked him, why did you go into the gang? He said, $12 an hour. I couldn't find a job for $12 an hour, so I went into the gang so I could have some money. And these days, a good apprenticeship in a tool room or a machine shop starts at 12, 15, something like that, dollars an hour. The rural opioid epidemic, I'm sure Ohio has had it just like other areas where the white population has had severe depression and other problems because the factory in town closed and they couldn't find anything like an equivalent job. There's a lot of unemployment still from COVID. A lot of people in retail and services are going to be looking for jobs. I have this vision of vacant strip malls near areas of residences, near where people live, being converted into machine shops and wire harness makers and things like that. Not foundries, not steel mills, very, very clean, very modern things. And so those local people who used to sell products now get to make them. And there's apprentice programs and career opportunities and working your way up. To me, there's nothing better for most people than a good manufacturing job, especially if it has career advancement opportunities. But companies will say, yeah, that's great. I'd like to bring the work back, but I just can't afford it. As I told you before, the price difference is just too great. And that's significantly because they do not do the math correctly. They look only at the wage rate, called wage arbitrage, or only at the FOB or ex works price, called purchase price variance. Or maybe a little better, they look at landed costs, which would be that price plus duty and freight. Yeah. But in any of those methods, they're missing 10 to 20% of the costs that they should be including. And so those costs that they typically ignore are the duty and the freight, but also the carrying cost of inventory, the travel costs, the intellectual property risk. Paul mentioned the value of a made in USA label, the risk of stocking out, which has been very apparent during the last year. So all these things added together can be calculated with the TCO estimator to come up with a better decision. So here's an example of that. In this case, the Chinese price, ex-works price was 70, and for US it was 100. So the procurement person looks at that and says, wow, that's $30 difference, 30% difference. I'm going to buy 12,000 of those a year. So that's $360,000 of purchase price variance. That's a third of my objective. I'm going to get my bonus. I'm going to get promoted. Of course, we'll send it off to China. That makes total sense. Yeah. But they do total cost and they see that today the total cost for China is 98, US is 108. So now there's only 10% difference. And assuming that the wage rates, et cetera, continue to grow as they have, in a couple of years, the Chinese total cost will be higher. So hopefully the company will say, it does not make any sense to send the new version of that product offshore, because in a couple of years, we're just going to be bringing it back. And there's a transition cost for doing that. And the work that's offshore now, over the next couple of years, we should be planning to expand, hire, find local suppliers, and bring at least a portion of it back here because we'll be more profitable by doing so. So to put the power of this in perspective, I took that, remember that data I showed you with the bar charts? So I took that same data, and that's the blue line here. So again, that's the Chinese price as a percentage of the US price. Again, at 100, they're equal. And you can see that about 8% of the cases, the number to the right of the vertical line, 8% of the cases, the US had the lowest price. Whereas with total cost, in 32% of the cases, the US had the lowest. And if there happened to be a 15% tariff, then 46%. So just by doing the math correctly, substantial portions of what companies now import can be brought back, but you have to do the math. If you don't do the math, you continue to look only at the price and you say it can't be done. So one of our main jobs is to provide the tool, TCO Estimator free online, and to encourage you to use it. So our job overall is with the TCO Estimator to help OEMs buy and site, in other words, pick plant locations smarter by considering all the ramifications. And for suppliers, the smaller companies that sell to the OEMs, to sell smarter, to help to convince the OEM to look at the total cost instead of just the price. So as an example of this, there's a company outside Chicago, Mori Corp. They make printed circuit boards. They're an EMS company. And about 4 years ago, the VP sales came to me and said, Harry, we're about to lose a big order. Can you help me? I said, sure, let's do TCO. So Tony, with my help, worked out TCO and showed his customer or prospect that even though Mori's price was higher, the total cost from the customer's perspective, Mori was actually lower. And as a result of this, Tony said he got the $60 million order by helping the customer do the math correctly. So some cases in the local area. I just got this slide last night. I had run into this company recently. They started off making LED products, which are mainly imported. So that might have been reshoring. And then they definitely went into PPE, making masks, and have done very well in both areas. So I applaud them for having done that in Northwest Ohio. Here's a case of foreign direct investment and reshoring case. Again, both happen to be bottles. Bottles must be popular. You can see all the reasons. I'm going to go through them pretty quickly. Cliffs, big industrial company with a good sized facility in Toledo, and solar in Toledo. So a nice range of products and significantly products that had been hard to produce in the US or unlikely here. Here's another one that we came across that produces automation systems, and that specifically has seen a substantial upturn in their work because of increased reshoring, because their customers were reshoring, and therefore the customer came to them. And APT provided the automation to make the product affordable here. So things that we provide that can help you. The TCO estimator I described, it's free online. And I'm assuming you're going to get a copy of this PowerPoint. It's definitely free online, but in any case, you can find it on our website. And there's a training webinar, 1 hour, just like a deep dive into how to use the TCO estimator, again, free to use. So these things are absolutely free for you to take advantage of. And then we have a variety of services. Most relevant probably for the smaller companies out there is the import substitution program, which I'll describe. And then we have one to help the OEMs, the bigger companies, to make better sourcing decisions, and one to help either companies or the state fill national supply chain gaps. But looking at the ISP program, a company can put up a product that they're really good at making. So a shaft, a bearing, a housing, something they're really good at making, a pump. And then we can tell them who the biggest importers are of that product, what the company is, where it's located, how many tons of that product they bring in, whom they buy it from offshore, some rough idea of what they're paying for it. And then we train the local Northwest Ohio company to use the TCO estimator to work out the relative TCO, like I did for Maury or did with Maury. And then the company takes that, goes to those importers and says, I see you're importing, 100 tons a year of widgets. We've got this new equipment for making widgets. We're a lot of training, a lot of experience. We're really good. We've done the TCO calculation. We think you're going to be 10 percentage points better off buying from us than continuing to import. So this is a service that we're offering here in Northwest Ohio. And so specifically, we're encouraging the companies out there to apply. The company has to be in the 17 county Northwest Ohio region. To apply, you would use the ISP Import Substitution Program input form, which is linked from that those words in the slide. And by the end of May, so that's what, 6 weeks from now, roughly, send that completed form to me, to Jed, to Paul, and to Mike. Okay, and we're going to make the first two. We're going to make 2 free ISP services available. Then the project team, will select the top applications based on completeness, suitability, timeliness, like getting it in by May 31st. And after that, then there's a charge for the service. It's $1,000 a product. But at least to get Northwest Ohio started on this, the first 2 are free. And I look forward to seeing your applications and, getting with the group, picking the best, and then working with those companies to make this happen and bring more work to Northwest Ohio. So we're a nonprofit. We're supported by the groups that you see here. Those if you're in machining or anything like machining, AMT that puts on IMTS, the big machine tool show. Gardner puts out Modern Machine Shops, all kinds of other things. This is my old company I used to run, but a whole range, like Paul mentioned NTMA, the whole range of trade associations, companies, manufacturers, all kinds of groups. The American Electric Power, one of your local utilities. So we were honored to have all these people supporting us and making it possible for us to bring services like this to Northwest Ohio. So this is how we think of ourselves as there's supposed to be a little Dutch boy, and he was in Holland, and the dike keeps the North Sea out of Holland. So that's little Dutch boy, dike, North Sea, and so he's walking along, and there's a little hole, and the water's coming out, and the little stones are coming out, and the big stones are vibrating a little bit, and he says to himself, "Wow, this thing's going to go. What am I going to do?" And he sticks his finger in the hole and holds it together. So it's an old sort of myth kind of story, and he says, "Wow, I hope the village elders will find me and save the the village from the flood." And so conceptually, this is offshoring over there, and this is Harry when Harry had some hair, and you're the village elders. And if you say, "Harry, nice talk, good luck, guy, hope it works," well, then probably things don't get a lot better. But if you take the message back and look at what your company can do to reshore, look how you can help your customers reshore, then the Northwest Ohio, the country, will be better places for us and our children, our grandchildren. And that's why I'm doing this. And I appreciate the help of the team to make it even more aggressive and accelerated in Northwest Ohio. So that's my piece, and we're open to questions.
Thank you so much, Harry. Gosh, our punctuality is amazing. We've got 15 minutes for Q&A to round out the hour so that you all can get back to your jobs. And I'm not seeing any questions in the Q&A box, so I may go around and ask questions of you all attendees. So a big thank you to Harry Moser and the Reshoring Initiative, who goes very deep on reshoring and import substitution. And just looking at Harry's website will give you a great education. Encourage you all to reach out to him and to reach out to Jed Metzger, the Lima Allen Chamber, and the other partners involved. in this event today. Hopefully, we've been able to connect some of the dots on reshoring and import substitution. Oh goodness, we have a Q&A and a chat. Should have thought of that one. So we have a question. Why is there a shipping container storage? Harry, I'm sure you've got some good tidbits about that, as do I, but please, Harry, why is it so difficult getting containers these days?
Normally, there's an intricate sort of choreographed ballet that goes on of shipping product from, especially from Asia and somewhat from Europe to the United States, with full containers coming over, and maybe on the ships going back, maybe a third of the containers are empty, and they get them back to the original source, they fill them up again, they ship them in again. That's a trade deficit. And with the when COVID came on, all kinds of things went wrong. A lot of the ships got pulled out of use because there wasn't much demand. So they were sidelined. The containers wound up in the wrong place, so they weren't available where they needed them. And then people got all the money from the CARES Act or PPE or PPP or whatever it is, and they started buying televisions and furniture and everything else to fix up their homes. And so all of a sudden the demand for product coming in from offshore skyrocketed just at the time when the capacity to move this stuff was down. And then we got hit by Suez, and we've had COVID restrictions at the docks, which has hurt the loading and unloading of the boats. And I know that's the ones I can remember. Paul, what can you add to that?
Yeah, well, you have a good point of normally a container will go from X to Y full and come back full or 75% full. You know, a classic case is Honda. Honda of America years ago started shipping soybeans back to Japan from primarily Northwest Ohio to utilize those containers. I've also read that because of COVID, containers were going to places that they normally don't go, full of masks and wipes and toilet paper and things like that. And a container would be in Madagascar or Zimbabwe and not go back to its place of origin. So that explains much of the reason why there is a shortage of containers. Another question came in. What are any of the climate benefits to reshoring, onshoring, and import substitution?
Okay, that's a good one for me. Substantial would be the one word answer.
Yeah.
Specifically, we did a study of a 2-pound aluminum die casting produced in China and shipped to the US or produced in the US. Aluminum is rather electricity intensive, and the Chinese electricity is substantially produced with coal, and their coal is dirtier and their pollution controls have been less. And therefore, just comparing the casting being produced versus here, a substantial reduction in pollution by doing it here. And then in addition, you have to take it from there and get it to here, which adds some additional emissions. So our final conclusion was, depending on the exact processes used in producing the die casting, that the CO2 emissions were reduced 25 to 50% by reshoring the work to the United States.
Yeah, I think that question was from my good pal, Ian Chambers. And it's funny, this morning I was thinking about the green aspects of reshoring. And certainly there is just the simple act of shipping those goods from the other side of the world to here and the carbon footprint that leaves, but also, I don't know how to put it, the lack of attention to environmental concerns amongst many manufacturing facilities in certain countries of the world. So they're making that product, yet they're spewing out, 20% more or whatever more in pollution than would happen if that product was made in good old Lima, Ohio.
Yeah. So one thing that brings to mind to me, many of you may have heard of the Business Roundtable, which is an association of the top couple of hundred US corporate CEOs. And back in August of 2019, they redefined the purposes of a corporation, because until that time, the only responsibility was to the shareholder. The stakeholder was the shareholder. And in this statement that 181 of them signed in August of 2019, they said, no, going on, it's the shareholder, sure, but also the community, the employees, and the suppliers. And now I've seen, so we have a section on our website that says, okay, Business Roundtable, enough talk, it's time to walk. And our point is that a lot of them have been very generous, giving hundreds of millions of dollars to organizations and communities and towns to help the poor and the downtrodden. But how much better use of their money would be to reshore and bring back the production of their products so that those people in those communities had jobs? Because the best thing for those people isn't a handout, isn't a free this or that, it's a good job and a good career. So I always take the opportunity to call on the big companies and to think about how much better they could do for employee, community, suppliers, environment, if they'll bring the manufacturing back to the US.
Yeah, good. We have another question from Chris DeVita. As a member of a local chamber of commerce, what can they do to promote reshoring in my community? And actually, Mayor David Berger, through chat, sent a really good idea and replay this presentation to the companies in your community, or get some of the information from it. Look at Harry's and the Reshoring Initiative's website. Involve the Reshoring Initiative. Encourage your companies to reach out to the Lima Allen Chamber, to Regional Growth Partnership, to Jobs Ohio, to SIFT. Reach out to anyone involved in the event today, and we'll make sure that they get the resources that they need to explore the possibility of reshoring or import substitution.
Now, one thing I'd add to that, in almost all your communities, there has been some reshoring. And some people almost don't know about it. If you're a machine shop and you get an order from a big company for a part, you may not even know that the company used to buy it from China or India or somewhere else. But if you can get your companies to identify work that they have that's been reshored and get that promoted in the local media, on the TV, in the local newspaper, on the radio, about the Northwest Ohio first quarter or January cases of reshoring and foreign direct investment, how many jobs, where they came back from. First, that sends a message to the other companies, wow, look at all the publicity they're getting. They're succeeding and bringing it back. Why can't I do that? Why, the boss says, hey, look and see if we can get some of that action. And the secondary benefit is, by letting your society see that it's happening, you can overcome one of the biggest problems that most manufacturers have, which is skilled workforce. Almost every manufacturer says, I can't find the people, I can't find good people, don't get enough recruits. But if the students and the guidance counselors and the parents all said, looks like manufacturing is coming back from offshore to Northwest Ohio. Yes, Susie, if you want to become a welder, I think that's probably a pretty good decision. Why don't you become a welder? As opposed to, no, you have to go to university and study philosophy or anthropology or something. So they're just, you can create a culture and momentum for reshoring by helping to document what's happening in your community.
That's a good point, Harry. And in addition to looking at just the total, the cost differential, realize that it's a business case. So that company in your community, not only do they have to calculate, this is going to be the cost for us to manufacture this product here, but the company will most likely need to invest in new machinery and equipment, possibly add on to their existing facility, most certainly hire more people. And in those instances, just do your usual Chamber of Commerce and economic development thing and connect them to RGP or our equivalent in another part of the state and to Jobs Ohio, so that they can explore the programs that we have, incentives such as tax credits, grants, low interest loans, workforce programs that can help them, because reshoring and import substitution is adding a tremendous load to your manufacturing processes, to your marketing, and to your distribution.
So another idea would be to survey your companies, the bigger companies, let's say in your area, and say, tell us about products that you'd love to buy locally, but you can't find. Huh? And then come up with a list of what those companies are looking for, those who are probably importing now, what they'd love to find locally, and then distribute that to your local manufacturers or maybe statewide manufacturers, and see if you can connect the buyer with the seller and solve the problem of the buyer and create the opportunity for the seller.
Harry, I've got a question that I thought of as you were speaking, and I'm not sure if I know how to explain it. To determine the total cost of ownership, if I can buy that clamp that I need to make my product in China for 70 cents, whereas here it would cost me $1 to make. In fuzzy math, what do I need to add on to that 70 cents to come up with the total cost of ownership?
Well, there's 29 factors in the TCO calculation online at the website for free. And so it starts, it's broken down into 3 or 4 sections. The first section is what I call hard costs. So duty, freight, packaging, hard cash kind of costs like that. And then carrying cost of inventory. Typically,
Sure.
If you import something, you often pay for it before it ships. You own it while it's coming over, and you typically have twice as much on stock as you would if you were getting it just in time, because you don't know when the container is going to arrive or what the quality is going to be. So you put all that together, you've got a big company has millions of dollars more inventory, and that costs them money to keep that. So intellectual property risk, the risk of stocking out, et cetera. So there's about 7 factors like that are sort of soft, like intellectual property risk. And we're, at the moment, people just sort of guess at what it would be, but we're almost finished developing, I'll call them mini spreadsheets, where the company can make certain estimates of the probability of intellectual property risk happening, how much they think they'd lose if it did happen. And then it does the software does a little calculation and inserts the number into the system. So some are hard, some are these softer kinds of things, but there's 29 of them, and if each of them was only worth 1% on average, up 1% of the value of the purchase price, they'd come out to 29%. And we say the average is probably 15 or 20%. So
that's about what I thought.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, as you say, there are 29 different factors, so you shouldn't use fuzzy math, but just, for general thinking, someone can say, okay, add 20% plus other factors as well.
Yeah, they could, that's what I've seen people do in the past. So I've seen other trade associations say, like, the cost of a foreign mold, add 20%. Okay. And then the buyer is going to say, bull, where's the 20%? It doesn't have credibility. Whereas right. if when you go to the TCO estimator, you'll see we're very clear about the input. There's an input page. We're very clear about what you're supposed to put in. And then on the output page, where it takes the inputs and does little algorithms, it has the equation by which the output cost is calculated. It shows how we calculate the inventory level and multiplied times the carrying cost, like 20%. And so the doubting Thomases, if I'm dealing with a doubting Thomas, I'll say, do you agree with the inputs we put in? Yes. I say, do you accept the calculations with which we've spelled out here on the right-hand column on the output page? Yes. Check a couple of them and see if we did the math correctly. Yes, you did. Do you agree with the conclusions? So we tried to make it as to take away any doubt or any ambiguity so that people would, so that the numbers would have credibility instead of just pulling 20% out of the air somehow.
I don't see any other questions in the chat or Q&A. Harry, I'm going to put you on the spot. Given the new administration in Washington, given your experience with the federal government, are there currently or are there planned any formal programs from the US government to stimulate reshoring and import substitution? And if there aren't any in place, do you know if there are any plans? I was speaking with some US Department of Commerce people last week, and they said that reshoring is a very important issue in Washington these days.
It was under Trump. It is clearly is under Biden. Some of the MEPs in 3 or 4 of the states, 5 of the states have aggressive reshoring programs underway, which we're helping with, and SIFT is helping here. There's a discussion of the various bills have been introduced, and Biden has recommended tax penalties for companies that source offshore and tax credits for companies that reshore. Okay, has not passed. There's and you can see pluses and minuses to things like that. If is it fair if my company offshores and then reshores and I get a benefit, and your company never offshored, should I be paying less taxes than you who are the good son and I was the prodigal son? You see? So it just sort of ethically that bothers me a little bit. But
Yeah.
Finally, if they passed it, I'd be delighted by it, and I'd encourage everybody to use it. There's also very specific targeted programs that I'm quite sure will happen on chips, rare earth minerals, pharmaceuticals, and PPE, and one other, I think, electric batteries for electric cars. So in all those, there's going to be tens of billions of dollars spent to give grants to companies to incentivize them to bring the work back. That's clearly reshoring. And so I expect 2021 to be a boom year, 2022 to be the same for this trend. And as the US economy thrives, then the foreign direct investment will too, because the foreign companies are going to look over here and say, wow, things are really hot in the US. They can't meet the demand. We ought to have a factory there. And we can't meet the demand there, and we can't ship anything there. So we ought to put a factory there. So I think it's going to be a couple of really good years. And I expect Northwest Ohio to lead the way.
Well, I don't see any additional, one more Q&A. One last question. What sort of infrastructure concerns exist in onshoring efforts? Can our aging systems be relied upon? And that's a really good question.
I think I'm not so concerned about the roads and the bridges and the canals. You know, we're getting stuff from here to there. My main concern there is safety, that, you know, nothing collapses and somebody gets killed. I think the biggest infrastructure need is that our factories are old relative to German and ancient relative to Chinese. China is investing 2 or 3 times as much a year in automation, in CNC machinery, and all this stuff. People go over there and tell me how wonderful their factories are in comparison to ours. So to me, the biggest infrastructure gap is the factories, but even more so the workforce. The fact that the Germans, for example, 60% of the high school kids go into apprenticeship programs, and here maybe 4% do, and almost none of those into manufacturing. So we don't get kids that are as high on the skill ladder as, say, Germany, and we don't train them as well, and we don't get enough of them. So if I had to prioritize my infrastructure, I'd start with the workforce, and then I'd say the manufacturing infrastructure. And sure, I do what it takes in bridges and roads to keep them viable and from falling apart and anybody getting killed.
That's some good points, Harry. I also think that any shortcomings in the infrastructure in the US are offset by the lower cost of doing business in the US compared to countries that are deemed to have better infrastructures than the US. I saw something a couple of weeks ago, I forget who put it out. The US was ranked 13th in terms of infrastructure, quality of infrastructure. Of course, at the top was Singapore, towards the top, Germany, Scandinavian countries. USA was neck and neck with my former home of Belgium. However, if you think the cost of doing business and manufacturing in the US is much cheaper than it is in Germany or Singapore. So reshoring, onshoring, there are attractions to the US market that kind of offset any shortcomings in infrastructure.
So,
all right, I do believe that is it for questions and answers. Jed Metzger, Nicole Scott with the Lima Allen Chamber of Commerce. Thank you so much. Mayor David Berger, Allen Economic Development Group, SIFT, Ohio Means Jobs, Rhodes State College, Jobs Ohio, for getting this all together. Harry Moser and the Reshoring Initiative, thank you so much.
Let me throw in a last appeal
Yep.
to those who are still listening. Send in the applications.
Yes.
If you don't send in the applications and you don't do anything, then you just blew away an hour. Send in the applications.
And after this webinar, you will be getting a copy of this webinar, a recording, a link to Harry's website with the import substitution program application, and all of the contact information. And again, if you do nothing else, fill out that application, send it to one of us, send any questions you may have on reshoring, and we'll make sure that you're directed to the Reshoring Initiative and to other resources.
Thank you, Paul. Great job.
Thank you so much, Harry. Thank you, Jed.
Jed.
Thank you, Mayor Berger. Thank you to everyone. Enjoy the rest of your day.